This is the sixth day of the 7-day October 1973 session. We will resume with another koan from the Blue Cliff Records today. And like yesterday's koan, this one is also very brief. This is number 7, and it reads this way. A monk asked Master Hogen, that's in Japanese, in Fayen, and Chinese, I am Teisho. I ask your reverence, what is Buddha? Fayen said, you are Teisho. That's the end of the koan. Before going into the background of the koan, there's a subject that perhaps that we should talk about once again. We've already talked about it, and that is the subject of faith. Several people have told me in Doksan that as the session goes on, it becomes clearer and clearer to them that the real problem is a lack of faith in themselves, which always implies a lack of faith in the method, the teacher, and a lack of faith in the method and the teacher implies a lack in oneself, implies a lack of faith in oneself. There's a very pertinent quotation from Zen Master Hakuin, where he says, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in reality have no form. And as they have no form, they are unknown to those who dwell on the materialistic plane. They have been given form out of our necessity. Of course, the term materialist has many definitions. But certainly one of them is that a person who finds it difficult, if not impossible, to believe anything that's outside the realm of his senses, which of course includes a discriminating intellect. Having been brought up in an age of science, we feel that everything has to be proved by the scientific method. And yet if we ask ourselves, has science ever proved why the blood goes through our body without any effort on our part? Why our heart beats without any effort on our part? Why we move our bowels without any effort on our part? Why the sun goes through the heavens the way it does, and the moon? Why plants bloom in the spring? Why cats have kittens and not puppies, and so on? It would seem as though it would be the other way around. What is before our eyes, and of course this includes all the senses, is not nearly so profound as the evidence of, and evidence is the word, of what can't be experienced by the senses. Or at least the causes of these things can't be. That's why in Zen the most profound answer is, I don't know. And yet, those who place so much trust in science, and this is not a put down of science, if they stop to realize that so many of the truths of science, particularly the nature of the universe and man, were anticipated by the Buddha thousands of years ago, simply are being confirmed by science, or the scientific method, we would see that the introspective method, Zazen, a very powerful, if not the most powerful weapon We're learning about ourselves and the universe. We say ourselves in the universe, in reality they're not two. This would take us back to the Buddha. What was the Buddha's experience? What did he say about his experience? Or experiences? What does the Buddha say about the nature of the universe? And here we have so much material, such a wealth of material. And of course there's a confirmatory material from the patriarchs and the great masters. And so some familiarization with what they have said would certainly seem to be a prerequisite to establishing this faith in oneself. Well, we don't want to, since we talked about this last time, we don't want to say too much. However, there's just one thing here briefly from one of the Zen masters, a disciple of Hakuin Zenji called Torei Zenji, Japanese. And he says, when I, a student of the Dharma, this man, by the way, was a Zen master, he succeeded Hakuin. When I, a student of the Dharma, look at the real form of the universe, all is the never-failing manifestation of the mysterious truth of Tathagata. At any time, in any moment, and in any place, none can be other than the marvelous revelation of its glorious light. Well, perhaps just a few more lines. This is rather long, but this realization made our patriarchs and virtuous Zen masters extend tender care with a heart of worshipping, even to such beings as beasts and birds. This realization teaches us that our daily food and drink, clothes, and protections of life are the warm flesh and blood, the merciful incarnation of Buddha. Well, let us come back to the koan. Well, before we get to the koan, let's say something about this Hogen, or Fayen, to give him his Chinese name. His dates again are 885 to 958, which again puts him in the Tang period. Perhaps this is in a little later, just after the Tang, the 5 Dynasties period. It says he became a monk in a monastery at a very early age in his childhood. At first, he studied under the outstanding Vinaya master, Shi Chui, in a famous temple. A lover of learning, he not only studied the Buddhist scriptures, but also steeped himself in the Confucian classics. Urged by an impetus stirring in him, he went southward to Fuchao to seek instruction from a Chan master there. But his mind was not opened, and he took to the road again after several years. As he was passing by the monastery of Titsang, he was caught in a snowstorm, so that he had to stop over for a while. As he was warming himself by the stove, the abbot, Lohan Kwe Cheng asked him, "What is the destination of your present trip?" "I am only a pilgrim," he answered. "What is the meaning of your pilgrimage?" asked the abbot. "I don't know," was the reply. "Not knowing is the closest intimacy," came the cryptic remark of the abbot. Not knowing is the closest intimacy. The ordinary relative knowledge is what comes between us and things. A mind that is empty of all concepts and notions is really intimate with things. As we saw in the first koan in the Blue Cliff Records, Bodhidharma's classic answer, "I don't know." Even on another level, on a less profound level, it's a good answer. I think it was Confucius said somewhere that if you know, say so. If you don't know, say so. Very simple. Well, now this conversation goes on with the abbot here. When the snow had stopped, Fayen took leave of the abbot, who accompanied him to the door and asked him, "You say that the three realms are nothing but mind, and all dharmas nothing but consciousness." This is the kind of thing that we find in many other sects, other religions too. These abstract statements, these pictures of reality, these intellectual pictures. He's assigning names to things. Now notice how the abbot handles this. So the abbot says, "Tell me, is that stone out there in the courtyard within your mind or outside your mind?" "Within my mind," replied Fayen. At this the abbot said, "O you wanderer, what makes it so necessary for you to travel with a stone on your mind?" Fayen was taken aback by this remark, and laying down his bag, he decided to stay longer with the abbot in order to settle his doubts. Every day he presented his new views and new reasons to the master. But all that the master commented was, "No, the Buddha Dharma is not like that." At the end of a month, Fayen said to the master, "I have exhausted my stock of words and reasonings." The master said, "As regards the Buddha Dharma, everything is a present reality." At the hearing of these words, Fayen was awakened. Of course, these words too are a picture. But maybe the abbot was trying to make him stop crying or complaining. One of the characteristics, as we'll see in a few more of these anecdotes or mundo, of Fayen was his ability to bring a person back to himself and to his present moment. He was a master at this kind of thing, and a sensitivity of sensing the right time, which is so important, not only in terms of Zen, but in terms of anything. A very powerful statement made at the wrong time can have no effect at all. A less powerful statement made at the right time, which means when the person is ready to receive it. And this is a very sensitive moment, and one must have not only the perspicuity to see that moment, but also the patience. Perhaps more than anything else, one needs to be emptied of any desire to want to teach, any desire to show off one's knowledge, and so on. This is the mark of a truly great teacher. Is his emptiness. Really. So long as the teacher has opinions that so long as he harbors opinions, his effectiveness is to that degree reduced. And the great teachers are the ones that are empty. And so they're part of everything, part of everyone. In this way, we can, whether we're teaching or not, help people. Then there's another here statement of Fayen's. It says, when he became an abbot, he used to say to his monks, reality is right before you, and yet you are apt to translate it into a world of names and forms. How are you going to retranslate it into its original? And then, even though he himself was pretty learned, he warned his monks against mere learning. He would tell them, in effect, that the real is before you, and it can only be perceived by direct intuition. And reasoning will only blindfold your eyes. Now, this statement about you're apt to translate it into a world of names and forms. This is something that the author of this book is constantly doing. He's constantly calling him a radical imperialist. He's calling every one of the people here, giving them all of these philosophical classifications and names. And of course, this is part of our way of relating. Our whole education seems centered in that direction. And yet the Buddha and all the masters tell us this is what causes our mayoi. This is the Japanese word for delusion. This is the sand being thrown into our eyes. Because we live by the name and by how we perceive the form, which we give a name. And then here, as Fayen says, how are you going to retranslate it into its original? We get so far away from our original true mind, and then we have to go through painful spiritual practices in order to get back to something that in reality we had never left, except in this kind of tentative way, this whole new world that we've superimposed on the real world. Most people are unable to function unless they give a name or a category to something. And that this is the very basis of our errors. And there's another mondo here. Once a monk asked, in what way must one expose oneself to Tao so as to be in tune with Tao? Fayen asked back, when have you ever exposed yourself to Tao without being in tune with it? And this kind of question shows that it's playing with words and concepts. Of course, this might have been an earnest question, or it just could have been another one of these intellectual type of questions by which we interpose between us and the real experience of trying to grasp the truth. This is going on all the time, consciously or unconsciously. And we must not be deceived by people that ask certain types of questions. And we see here one of the qualities of the masters is how they expose these questions for what they are. And of course, in the same time, they're exposing the mind of the person so that he can see not only the shallowness of the question, but the falsity of the question, that it springs from a shallow portion of the mind. Then the same monk proceeded to ask, "But what can you do when the six senses are incapable of appreciating the subtle voice of truth?" And what does Fayen say? They are all your own children. We can't check the responsibility of the way we respond to our senses. And then Fayen goes on. This continues this morning. He says, "You say that the six senses do not apprehend the subtle voice of truth. Is it the ear that is at fault, or is it the eye? But if fundamental reality truly is, how can it be negated, even though the six senses have no perception of it? How could it be denied?" And this, in fact, ties in with what we said at the very beginning about faith. People say, "How do you know that?" when someone makes a statement. Why is it that you don't know it? Why don't you read your senses correctly? Why don't you use your inner eye, your intuitive eye? Then you would also know this, or at least you'd have some kind of a glimpse of it. As Hakuin says, like a person who in the midst of water cries, "I thirst." Or we might say it's like a person who in the midst of water says, "There's no water here. I don't see any water. I just feel wetness." And then there's another, then this continues, the same dialogue here, and Fayen goes on, he says, "As the ancients said, to leave the senses is to be attached to the senses, and to leave names and letters is to be attached to names and letters. That's why the devas of the thoughtless heaven fell in a single day back to their original state of ignorance and delusion after 80,000 mahakalpas of self-cultivation and mortification. This was bound to happen, seeing that they did not have an authentic insight into fundamental reality." The last part perhaps can be translated in a kind of a modern idiom by saying, this is why those who have only learning knowledge, no matter how wise they appear to be, eventually they fall into deep pain, anxiety, fear, and so on, lacking this authentic insight. Now this to leave the senses is to be attached to the senses, and to leave names and letters is to be attached to names and letters. It's not a matter of denying or repudiating the senses. We have in other teachings such statements as, "Do not identify with the body," by which of course is meant the senses. We've pointed this out at workshops many times when people ask about different traditions. All teachings point to the truth. So why is Zen any holier, any better than any other teaching? But here we see that do not identify with the body. It's just the very opposite of what he is saying here. Do not identify the body is a repudiation of the senses, and therefore is an attachment to them. There's sort of a clinging to the non-senses, or clinging to the idea of detaching oneself from the senses. We've had many masters who have, Wang Po also somewhere says, "You leave the world, the senses or something like that, escapes fire but leaps into the sea." Rather, in Zen, it is becoming so thoroughly one with the senses. Only then do we perceive what is beyond them, and yet not separable from them. To deny our daily life, which is certainly part of it, is the senses. This is how we get around. Of course, it is an extremely limited part of the true aspect of things. Nevertheless, it is through our senses that we come to the realization that there's more to reality than just the senses. You know, this famous koan in the Blue Cliff Records, it's toward the end there, with Ummon, where this monk comes to him and says that you masters are always talking about saving people. Well, suppose a blind person came before you. He couldn't see you. A person who was deaf, dumb, and blind. He couldn't see you. Couldn't see your gestures. He couldn't hear your words. And he couldn't ask any questions at all. How would you save such a person? And then Ummon begins to put him through. We've repeated this many times. We don't have to go through the koan again. But it shows the Zen way of handling these kind of things. Instead of arguing or giving all kinds of subtle things, although occasionally masters do it. We see here in Fayen as a sort of a combination of these two. Again, depending on the makeup of the person, sometimes he'll use a certain amount of intellectuality, but always he gets back to bringing him up against himself, making him see that his question or what's behind the question is so shallow. There's another dialogue. One time a monk asked, "What is the state of one reality?" Fayen replied, "If it's a state, there cannot be the one reality." Another time when he was asked, "What is the mind of the ancient Buddhas?" he said, "It is that from which flow compassion and joyful giving." Notice that, not joyful living, but joyful giving. It is that from which flow compassion and joyful giving. Then when he was asked, "What is the right and true way?" he answered, "That which I have vowed once and again to teach you to walk on." Another time a monk said, "It has been said, all the worthies and sages of the 10 quarters belong to this school." Now what exactly is this school? And his answer was, that to which all the worthies and sages of the 10 quarters belong. Another time when a monk asked about the ancient Buddhas, he remarked, "Even now, there are no barriers." Actually, this is very much like our present koan. Bring him right back to himself. There are no barriers between you, between your realization of your true nature. You just think they are. You've just erected them. Another time when he was asked what was the secret aim of all the Buddhas, he said, "You also have it in yourself." And perhaps one more here. On another occasion, a monk said to him, "I am not asking about the pointer. I only wish to know what is the moon." And of course, is that very well-known dialogue about don't take the finger for the pointing finger for the moon. So referring to this, he says, "I'm not asking about the pointer. I only wish to know what is the moon." And the master answered him, Who is the pointer that you do not ask about? And then another monk then asked, I am not asking about the moon. I only wish to know who is the pointer. The moon, said the master. The monk protested. I was asking about the pointer. Why did you answer me with the moon? The master replied, because you were asking about the pointer. Now this isn't just a clever repartee here. The moon also is a pointer. Just as the finger is a pointer. The moon's a name. Everything's a pointer if we see it this way. We must get beyond the point. The pointing can be valuable. But just as we mustn't take the finger for the moon, we mustn't take the moon for the finger. This is what he's really saying. Well, all right. We get enough here. Now let us get back to our koan. A monk asked Fayen, I am Teisho. I ask you, what is Buddha? Now, this question, what is Buddha, as you all know, is a very common question. It's like, why did Bodhidharma come from India to China? It's the type of question that becomes a kind of a formula after a while. And of course, lots of things can be behind the question, what is Buddha? In most cases, probably these monks, especially those who are more advanced, are trying to elicit some kind of answer from the master. Sort of a kind of testing, perhaps, of the master. But perhaps on another level, it may be a genuine question in the sense that it grows out of a real concern. After all, we must remember that here we're dealing, essentially, these are monks, people who have taken the vows, being a monk, to follow the Buddha's way. And they've been, no doubt, many of the monks for many years. They grew up in an atmosphere of Buddhism and so on. And many of them, especially if they were in the other sects than Zen, had all kinds of notions of Buddha. And of course they come into Zen and they find some very irreverent things, to say the least, that are stated about Buddha. Or else they get, if they're not seemingly crude expressions, then they're certainly very mystifying expressions. The type of things that are not said in the other Buddhist sects. You remember I think it was yesterday when we read some of the one-word barriers of Ummon. One question was, what is Buddha? And he said, go. Of course, that go could have many meanings. Go chase yourself, or oh, go on. Don't bother me. And so on. And no doubt these monks heard about these things or read about them. And so, with the teacher, this question very often came up. What is Buddha? And Fayen says, you are Teisho. Now, first, this I am Teisho. Why does the monk give his name? Fayen, or Hogen, was a very popular teacher in his time. It is said that he never had less than 500 monks in his monastery, which is certainly no inconsiderable number. And in Doksan, first of all, probably Doksan was very hard to get to. Monk didn't have Doksan very often. Not only that, but course, the teacher, Fayen, couldn't remember all the monks there and their names, and so the custom was that to give your name first. So he would at least have some connection with the monk on that level. So no doubt this monk goes and says, well, my name is, I am Teisho. Now may I ask you, what is Buddha? The master says, you are Teisho. Sometimes this has been translated as, so you are Teisho, which probably literally may be close to the original. But it's better translated as you are Teisho. And just as in that koan of Ummons, how can you save a person who's deaf, dumb, and blind? Here Fayen is saying, realize that Buddha is no different from yourself. What's the use of asking, what is Buddha? It's like looking in the mirror and saying, who am I? Is this my face or isn't it my face? Although, to look in the mirror and ask yourself, is this my face I had before my parents gave birth to me? Could probably be an enlightening experience. Of course, the trouble is, though, most people, from long, again, habit, the minute they look in the mirror unconsciously, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Comes into the mind, in one form or another. Which, by the way, is one reason why we don't have mirrors around here. Now, no doubt, again, we don't know what this monk, whether he's a young monk or an experienced monk. We don't know whether his mind's eye has been opened to some degree, or whether he's completely blind. No doubt, of course, as we saw in the examples that were quoted, Fayen was always bringing his questioners back to themselves. And here, you are Teisho also means you have your senses, your 6 senses. You have arms, you have legs, you have a brain, and so on. Realize your true nature. Instead of just asking, what is Buddha? Realize your own Buddhahood. Don't ask about others. Count your own treasure and not somebody else's. All of this is in the Master's answer. Now, this monk is said to have had an awakening with this. Another quality of Fayen was as we mentioned earlier about his being able to seize the right time. He's often called some kind of a name that he was given. He was like a chicken who knew the right time to peck on the egg to hatch the chick. Of course, this is an instinctive thing with chicken, or at least we say instinctive, whatever that means in that case. And that ability to sense the right time, no doubt was at work here. With many other people whose minds were not ready, he may have said this differently. Very likely if he just said, so you are Teisho. This is quite different from saying, you are Teisho. You are the whole universe. Nothing outside you. Nothing you lack. Except one thing, and that is to realize this, to wake up to it. Now, this type of koans, by the way, is a well-known koan. It's quoted very often. And because of its brevity, it's a kind of thing a kind of koan that can get very deep into us. We can translate this in terms of our own practice here. What is Mo? You are Mo. Nothing is outside this Mo. Not different from your six senses. And yet it is more than your six senses. If we look at the koan this way, then this will help our practice considerably.